Shalom. Welcome to Covenant Calendar Club, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome
Welcome
to
to Covenant
Club.
Welcome.
Hallelujah.
Good to be here. Anyway, it's quite an interesting study tonight. And it's going to be on Yah's Covenant Calendar. And we're actually going to do part 2 of When Does the Day Begin? We did part 1 the other week. And we were calling it the Dawn Day Sampler. It's an easy PowerPoint for those that are just learning. And so tonight we want to look at part 2. And this is called What Does the Day Begin According to the Torah? And also we are going to look at some very, very different things. But the other question is, what does the day begin, or when does the day begin according to you? And of course, there's one more question. When does the day begin according to Yah's covenant calendar? Are they all the same, or are they all different? Well, Yahuwah is light. He is never referred to as darkness in Genesis 1. He is light. And on the first day of creation, right there in verse 1, the earth was illuminated with Yahuwah's light. It must have been a spectacular event. Light began the first 24-hour cycle on that very first day, until light appeared again to begin the second 24-hour cycle. And everything about Yahuwah's day start is from light to light. That's a really important concept. If Yahuwah's day start is with light, then why do most Sabbath keepers begin their day with sunset? And some are even doing noon, and some are doing sunrise. Some do midnight. That's the question that needs to be answered for this topic. You know, this issue started in the very beginning, before the verse of Genesis 1:1. I bet you remember the story because it was in heaven. Before Genesis 1:1 even happened, Lucifer usurped the worship rightly belonging to only Yahuwah. And being cast to this earth, the plan of Yahuwah's enemy has not changed, not one bit. And there is one way that Satan has accomplished his goal through a very interesting deception. Well, how would that be? Satan has stolen worship due to the Creator by changing Yahuwah's calendar used to find his weekly and annual worship statutes. That's one way that he decided that he was going to take worship away from Yahusha. And we're going to have Tim help us tonight with batches of slides. So he will be taking slides 11 to 18. Thank you, Tim.
But that is not all he has changed. He has even changed when the day begins. Really? Yes. He has even changed when the day begins, if you can imagine that. And he changed it for Yahuwah's worship statutes. And that's what we're going to look at. And this is the importance of timing on this dawn to dawn topic. The modern 24-hour day begins at midnight. This is called Roman reckoning of time as found in the Gospels. And you can see that in Matthew 27, verse 19. That's a prime example of it. The Jews and most feast keeper Sabbatarians begin their Sabbath Friday evening at sunset. That's the norm. Here's a quote from Julian Morgenstern, and it's from the Ancient Calendars of Israel, page 103. Remember, the weekly Sabbath is the premier flagship of Yahuwah's festivals, Leviticus 23, 2-8. Note, and there is a massive amount of information thoroughly exposed in the scriptures which is succinctly summed up as follows. And here is the quote from Julian Morgenstern. To period 2a, and that is around approximately 700 to 300 BC, belong those processes which practically completed the evolution. Yes, that's the word he used, evolution, of calendar 3 as a perfect or approximately perfect lunisolar calendar. Interesting that he would say approximately perfect. They recognize that there is problems. And he also, the change in the system of reckoning the day. I'm going to read that again. The change in the system of reckoning the day. The redating of the festivals to begin when? To begin at sunset. You're redating them to do this, to accomplish or to achieve a sunset start. Continuing on. And with this, the final and complete fusion of the Passover and Matzot festivals as recorded in Exodus 12:18. The new system of months, very interesting words there. The new system of months of alternately 30 and 29 days each, and the new system of intercalation. That's a very revealing quote from Julian Morgenstern. And these are changed from Torah's dawn to dawn and the Mazzaroth to Kufa light-based calendar reckoning. That is the original in the Torah. All these changes have become from that. And I sure like that word that he used, evolution, because everything changed. Gradually was, well, just changed. What other word can I use? When Yahusha said to the scribes, and they were to his to his brothers, when he said, "Your time is always ready," that word in the Greek means manipulated. So Yahusha knew very well all these changes that had taken place. Okay, here we go. However, Scripture reveals when the day begins, and it is neither midnight, noon, sunset, evening, or sunrise. Let's start with an introduction first of literal events before moving to the definitions. So these are going to be the literal events that we're going to be looking at first. There we are. Creation's restoration began after the earth became, iethe, came to be, void, formless, and dark. You see that in Genesis 1, verse 2a. That come to be means that there is a transformation or a transition from one state of being to another state of being. This darkness is choshek, H28:22, not leil, the night as we know it today, H39:15. This choshek has a whole new story behind it. Very interesting definitions. And the Ruach moved upon the face of the waters. We read that in Genesis 1, verse 2b. And there was, that's the normal word that we see in our editions, and it actually should be came to be light. And there came to be light. Genesis 1, verse 3b. The restoration of the creation week began when our Creator said, "Let there be light." Nothing, absolutely nothing, started with darkness. And here's a very revealing verse, Psalms 104, verse 30. "Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth." That word renewest is extremely important, and that is what we have found happened on a few days in the creation week. Things had to be renewed and restored.
Absolutely. And I would just like everybody to take a note of our little pictures there of literal events. There's going to be one for definitions and literal events. And when I have a literal event check mark, I want you to just clue in that this is a literal event. Let there be light. There was nothing starting with darkness. And we'll see the other one coming up here. Remember definitions. So these are two categories that we are going to be working with in this PowerPoint today. The very first day of the first week could never begin with Kushak darkness. And it could not begin with evening, which is Erev. Remember, in verse 1, day 1 began with the light of Yahuwah's presence. It was his light that came. And then Yahuwah divided the light from the darkness. That's what it tells us in Genesis 1, verse 4. He divided this light from the darkness. There was darkness, but it didn't start out that way. And then it says in Genesis 1, 5, and Yahuwah called the light day, and the darkness he called night. This is a literal event, but there are also definitions in these phrases. And these definitions, we need to understand them for calendar terms. What we're going to find out is that these two different categories are quite different. This was the very first covenant given on the first day of creation, and it was called the covenant of the day and the covenant of the night. That's a definition. You'll find that in Jeremiah 33, verses 20 to 25. Imagine that, a very first covenant given on the first day of creation, called the covenant of the day and the covenant of the night. And this is a very special covenant, and it's the beginning of Yahuwah's covenant calendar. This calendar is completely based on light, just as Yahuwah is light. Everything is about light. But before we go any further, we should examine some charts that will diagram the outline for day start in Yahuwah's creation week, so that you know where we're going with this study. There's going to be some very special attention for Genesis 1, verse 5. In Genesis 1, verse 5, it is the most important verse in the creation week as far as we're concerned, because it establishes two different concepts that must not be confused. And I just want to say right here that it was because we have not separated these two concepts before when we've been talking about what actually happened for day start on the first day of creation. It has caused confusion. So we're going to look at these two concepts. Concept A is going to be Genesis 1:5 and those definitions of those terms. We need to know what those definitions are. And in the second concept, we're going to look at the literal events. But not only that, we want to look at the order of those literal events. So our little reminder about definitions and our little check mark about these literal events. So what do you think the next step should be? We're going to expand concept A and concept B, and we're going to give you an idea of what's coming up ahead. In concept A, remember I said, that is going to be our definition of terms. Genesis 1:5 has to provide the scriptural definitions in order to correctly establish the proper day start. If you do not know the definitions of the terms, you will not know where they belong or how to put things in order. So the definitions are really, really important. In concept B, remember I said it was those orders of literal events. Remember, we've talked about keeping things in order. That order of the literal events for the day start in verse 5, and that's going to be the very first day of creation, all the way up from verse 1 to verse 5. This literal order of events is different on day 1 than it is on any other day. It's different. Day 1 is a little bit different. We're going to start with concept A first. First, we need to know some definitions before we can figure out the rest. So let's pay some special attention to the first part, because these definitions are going to help us to understand the full literal meaning and the order of this day start in Genesis 1. We're going to look at light, which is or in Hebrew, day, which is yom. We'll look at darkness, which is koshak, and night, which is leel. We'll look at evening, which is erev, morning, which is boker, and we will look at twilight. Even though that word is not mentioned on the first day, we will look at twilight. And as needed, we're going to give these definitions, and we'll expand upon them in concept B as we get going. So special attention to these concept B. We've done concept A. Let's look at number B, concept B. These literal events in verse 5, remember I said, for the day start on the first day of creation are very different than the other days of creation, especially up to day 5. And we're going to look at it this way. We'll expand this. But day 1 of creation begins with Yah's or light, okay? Days 2, 3, and 4 of creation are days that are going to begin with Yahuwah's Boker light. And day 5 is a day that begins with the sun's Boker light. These are all literal events. So when we have these concepts and they're all fully explained, then Genesis 1:5 is going to come into clear focus and we should be able to understand it. That's the idea anyway. So let's start with concept A. Now, I didn't know which one to do first, but I finally decided we should maybe look at the definitions first. If we don't know the definitions, we might not know how to put the order together. So let's do those first. And lots of you know what the definitions are, but for those of us that are new tonight, here we go. Day is Yom. It's 3117 in the Hebrew. And the very first definition of the word day, and the word day can be confusing, we're going to look at that, but the very first definition of day is the warm hours of the day season, or the first 12 hours of what would be called light. The second definition for day is a full 24-hour cycle from the day start to the day start. So that's going to include the day and the night. The first time that darkness is used in Genesis 1 is this Koshek darkness, and it is literally a very obscure and contaminated darkness. It's not just an ordinary night. It is a very obscure and contaminated darkness that happened when the earth came to be void and without form. We're not going into that too deep tonight. And then light is or, O-W-R. It just means illumination of light, and this is after daybreak. This is what it is, after a daybreak. But was there a daybreak in verse 1? Number 4, night. Lael, that's easy. It's just a twist away from the light. When you have no more light, you have night. And then evening is a rev. The very first definition of evening is dusk, a dusk twilight. And morning is boker. The very first definition is dawn, or the dawn twilight. And that's why I have twilight here. It's neshef, and the very first definition of twilight in the scriptures is dusk, and the second one is dawn, okay? So I put twilight there because the evening and the morning are called twilights in a generic term. Now the word day is often misunderstood by so many people. But you know what? Moses wrote the book of Genesis, and he totally understood this word day. And that's why you can trust Genesis 1, because he put everything in order. In Genesis, Yahuwah defined the word day as including both the twilight transition times of evening and morning. Lots of times you'll see even pictures on the internet that show that these twilight times look like they're belonging to the night, but they do not belong to the night. Let's take a look at this definition for day, or yom. And what you'll find is the very first thing it'll say is it's the warm hours of the day, to be hot, like in the day season. In other words, from the beginning of the morning to the end of the evening, or about 12 hours or 12 segments of time on a sundial, that would be the very first definition for day. The very second definition for day is this full 24-hour cycle. It includes the day season and the night season. So between the day season and the night season, then you have your 24-hour day. That's the second definition. So that word day, yes, it can be so confusing to many, many people. According to the Hebrew word number 3117, there are two main definitions for day in the festal calendar study. and that's going to include twilights. Now, there are lots of other definitions for day, but when we're coming to a literal covenant calendar study, we only need to look at the first two definitions because the others don't apply. When Yahuwah separated the light from the darkness, he called the light day, and then he defined the day as being made up of both evening and the morning. So right here, we've got a literal event where Yahuwah is separating the light from the darkness. That's a literal event. But then we have a definition where he said that the light is called day. So we've got a literal event happening here, and we've got definitions. Both the evening and the morning twilights, every single day, they are mixtures of light and darkness. And that's why they belong to the day, the light season, because they have light. They have a portion of light, even if it's just a little tiny bit. They belong to the day season. And always remember, the night has no light from the light season whatsoever. It is absent of light. We did a little bit on twilights in part 1, but let's just do a little short review. What is a twilight? Because we find a lot of people don't understand this word twilight. And in part 1, we discovered that twilight is a mixture. It's a mixture of light with darkness. It's always a mixture. Well, there's a couple of different mixtures that man has given to twilights. There is astronomical, nautical, and civil twilight. But it's the astronomical twilight, the very first little bit of light that you see in the sky, that's where the day begins. That's your dawn marker right there. You can see the different degrees that man has given to it, 18 degrees or 12 degrees or 6 degrees of the sun below the horizon. This would all be before the sunrise. When you get to nautical twilight, it's a little bit brighter. And actually, if you have a civil twilight, you can actually see, you could even do some gardening outside or take a walk or read a book. Astronomical twilight, still pretty dark, but you can see light in the sky. And as I said, all three of these belong to the day season because they have light. That's just the way it is. So if you see light in the sky before you see the sun, you know that that is an astronomical, nautical, or civil twilight, depending on how bright it is. And of course, the night season doesn't have any light from the sun today at all. And guess what? Moses knew all about this. So this slide here is giving you some definitions so that you know how to work with these words. Of course, during the day season, you don't have any mixing. Okay, now that we know that the morning and the evening twilights belong to the day, the next question is, how long is this day? Is this day only 12 hours long, or is it 24 hours long? And which definition are we supposed to use? And Tim's going to help us here for a couple more slides. This is his favorite part.
Yes. Definitions of creation terms in Genesis 1:5. Genesis 1:5a. And the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. Very simple. Very, very simple. And that's in Genesis 1:5. And it's the day season and the night season. That is your full 24-hour cycle. And that is your definitions. We're going to be looking later on at the literal events. And here's Yahuwah's creation terms definitions continued. This is light phase number 1. Now remember, this is the first 12 hours. And there came to be evening, the twilight within this light season. The daylight season includes any twilight. Only the first day of creation has just one twilight. The evening twilight arrived following the first light season. The evening twilight was not first. Time did not start with the evening twilight. It followed the first light season of creating that Yahuwah established this earth in. On day 2, the pattern changes and contains 2 twilights. But the first 24-hour period only had 1 evening, 1 twilight. And that was after the initial creating. Light phase 1 of the day start question defines only the 12-hour day season. Here it comes. I can see it coming. Yahuwah's creation term definitions. This is light phase 2. And this is the final 12 hours came after the Areb twilight. That final 12 hours is the night season that come. So we see at first here, and there came to be evening. So this is describing the first twilight. That is a day season with 1 twilight. That is 1 12-hour light circle. And then we come into the final 12 hours, and that is the night. At the end of the first night, with the Boker dawn, or Boker or dawn, I should say, that's what ends the first night. That is the first 24-hour day, and it ends with the Boker. And that is their 1 12-hour light cycle, and there is 1 12-hour night cycle. There's your 1 24-hour day. That is phase 2 of the day start equation, adds the night season, finalizing the full 24-hour cycle. So the night ends with Boker, or dawn. The light ends the previous 24 hours. Yahuwah's creation term definitions, again, you'll notice on the left-hand side, you'll see the evening twilight. And in the middle, and the darkness he called night, and that's that word leil that we see. And the darkness he called night. You'll notice on the right, there's the morning twilight. That ends the darkness. That very, very first light that you see creeping above the dark horizon, that is dawn, and that is when your 24-hour day begins. That is when the Sabbath begins. That's the very, very, very first light that you can see. Waiting for that next slide to come along. There it is. It's coming. Internet is slow tonight. And day 1 is completed for literal definitions and events. There's your definitions on the left-hand side, and you saw, or we talked about the literal events coming up to the end of the night. And we are now ready to examine the literal events on the other days with concept B.
Okay, so this is where you buckle your seat belts, and don't forget their slide numbers. So if you have any questions, just take the slide number down. We're going to get started with the order of the events for concept B. We have some definitions of terms. We've been doing this for many, many months, and you should be well acquainted with that. But we want to look at this order of events because they do change between day 1, and then days 2, 3, and 4 have something else happening, and then day 5 has something new happening. So we want to look at these literal events and see what in the world is going on. And it's always important to remember that every definition in Genesis 1 verse 5 is of utmost importance. I can't emphasize this enough, but don't forget about that word darkness up there in verse 2. When the scriptures provide the definitions for the calendar terms, then you can know what's going on. We cannot just take our own definitions, or we can't just say, well, it reads that way to me. We have to be able to choose the proper definition for the context of the verse, and we need to keep everything in order. So in concept A, we have defined those terms of day, night, evening, and morning. Those are the most important terms right now that we'll be working with. Day, night, evening, and morning in that order. But Genesis 1:5 also has another purpose. It is to give the correct order of events as they occurred. I've had a lot of people ask me, why does it say evening first? Why doesn't it say morning and evening? That's a good question. So let's look at purpose 1a of this order of events. We're just going to look at the first part of Genesis 1:5 first. And this is what it says. This is the correct order of events for the Yom seasons, or for the 2 seasons of the day, the 2 seasons of a 24-hour cycle. This is what it says very simply. The day season comes first, and then the night season follows. When you read it, that's exactly what it says. Called the light day, and the darkness he called night. The second purpose of this verse is to have the correct order of events for the twilight season. Now, this is for day 1 only that we're talking about right now on this slide. Following the first light season of creating, that's when the first evening arrived of the whole creation week. That's where the first evening arrived. And then, the very next thing that happened was that night had to pass by. And then after that, you have creation's very first morning twilight. But that is starting cycle 2. That's where day number 2 started. I would just like you to take a note of this. At the first inception of that first morning twilight, and that would be Boker, and that's going to be light season number 2. This Boker, this very special Boker, was the separating action that divided the first 24-hour cycle from the new second 24-hour cycle. That morning Boker twilight was very, very important, and it did come in the right order. Absolutely it did. Well, you know, twilights have a lot of work to do. What are some of these other things that twilights achieve? Well, for one thing, twilights will always transition the day season to the night season. That would be your evening or your rev. And they always transition the night season back to the day season. Those are literal events. That's what a twilight does. That's a definition of a twilight, to transition from the day season to the night season, or from the night season through the Boker to the day season. Twilights are really, really important. But we don't ever want to forget that on day 1, light was brought forth first, and light began the first 24-hour cycle. And then that evening twilight followed about 12 hours later, is what we can say. Now, here's what we all need to remember. Evening cannot arrive first, as there has to be light first in order for it to mix with the ensuing darkness, and that's the only way you can have a twilight, if you have darkness mixing with the light. Now, here's a question, and I think this is the question for the whole study tonight. Slide 47. How in the world can evening begin a new day? Because we have so many people that observe the new day at sunset, and they say that's where evening comes in. So how can evening begin a new day on day 1 after the passing of the first 12 hours of light? 12 hours of light have passed, only 12 hours of light, or 12 hours of that day season. So how does evening start a new 24-hour cycle after only 12 hours have passed? That is a question you'll want to remember. Just a little summary for Genesis 1:5, and this is for day 1 only. Yahusha's light began the day. That is a literal event. And when the end of darkness came to be, all completed, that was the first full 24-hour cycle right there. So you have literal events, and you also have definitions here. Now, you might be saying, why has all this information been given for day 1 only? Well, the answer is because day 1 began with a very special pure light. It was that pure light of Yahusha. Day 1 did not begin with a morning Boker twilight. And that's going to be examined soon in a lot of detail according to definitions. So we're at the end of day 1. And at the end of day 1, this Boker light determines the end of night, and it determines the end of the very first day. So as we're looking at Yahuwah's creation terms, we're going to come up to light phase number 1, those first 12 hours of day number 2. And when you get to those first 12 hours of day number 2, what the Bible says, and there came to be morning. That was Boker. The very next thing, on the second daylight season, there's going to be something new that happens here, because this daylight season is going to have 2 twilights. It was only the first day of creation that had only 1 twilight, and that was because our evening arrived after the daylight. But beginning with day season number 2, the morning twilight arrives first this time. And day season number 2, guess what? It begins with Boker light, not with Or light, not with the Or light of Yahuwah, where he supplied that light for day 1. Now, he supplies all the light, but these are just different terms, because this Boker light is a mixture, okay? Or light is not a mixture, it's just pure light. So phase 1, this first 12 hours, okay, of this day season, it begins with Boker light. And guess what? It ends when the evening is over. That day season ends when the evening is over. So day number 2, we're ready now to look at the final 12 hours of this light phase. After the morning, what did Yahuwah do? He divided the waters on day 2. That was his creative work. That was a literal event. And after he was done, guess what it says? And there came to be evening. That's the second twilight of the day. This is on the second daylight season. And don't forget, this is the first day of the creation week that has 2 twilights. And the daylight season goes all the way up to the point of where the dusk twilight is going to end. So light phase number 2 includes the night season of the second day, and then it's going to end the second cycle of those 12 hours of night season all the way until the morning arrives. And I will ask this question again. Why has all this information been given for day 2? We know that there's an evening twilight that follows the day season. Well, the answer is because day 2 began with a very special morning twilight, or a Boker light. Day 2 did not begin with Or light. And that detailed explanation is also coming. So day number 2, after the evening, the darkness follows. It does that every single day, and we call that the night season. That is the final 12 hours to finish off the complete 24-hour cycle of day 2. And day 3 begins with the new morning twilight that separates the 24-hour cycle of the old day and begins the 24-hour cycle of the new day. Well, what did Yahuwah do on day 3? The plants were brought forth, the trees and the grass and the flowers, all the plants were brought forth. That was his creative work during the day season, on the third light season of the week. So we're back to this again. Do you have any idea why we're talking about days 2 and 3, and they're both beginning with morning Boker twilight? Why is this so important to know? Because I want you to understand that there's something different happening on these days that is very, very important. After we have our day, then the evening twilight follows. It ends the day season, and then we're going to have darkness follow. But here's another question. Will day 4 also begin with the same morning Boker twilight? Or will it begin by another option? And it's a tricky question. Day 4 is when the sun and the stars and the light givers are put into the sky. So the question is, will day 4 begin with the same morning Boker twilight or another way? I want you to think about that, because one of the day 4 twilights is going to be very, very unique on day 4. Day 4, it says there came to be morning. What kind of morning light was this? Was it from the greater light that we call the sun on day 4? How did the light start on day 4? Where did it come from? This is for Tim because he's going to give us some answers. When he gets his mic open.
Yes. Did our Creator arrive on day 4 with the same Boker light as on days 2 and 3? Yes. Then Yahuwah commissioned the 2 great lights, not 3, just 2. That's what the scripture tells us. Yahuwah commissioned the 2 great lights in the expanse of the sky. And what were they for? They were to separate and distinguish the day from the night. If they cannot accomplish a separating act or to distinguish the night from the day or the day from the night, then they are not a great light that was created and mentioned in Genesis 1, verse 14 to 16. The day 4 morning light was not provided by the sun. Why? Did the sun have its light at the very morning of day 4? Or when was the light given to the sun and to the stars? Day 4, light phase, and this is the first 12 hours. Day 4 will have a similar pattern as day 1. And there came to be morning. And what happened in the middle of the day? This is when Yahuwah commissioned the sun and the stars with light. That's what happened. The sun and the stars and the moon were already created on day 1. However, on day 4, Yahuwah commissioned 2 great lights, that is the sun and the Mazzaroth stars and the other stars in the sky also. That happened in the daytime. And there came to be evening. That was the twilight. The evening of day 4 has the very first twilight marked by the sun. Why was this so special? The light phase 1 of special importance, the evening twilight, marks the what? The midst of the week. This is the first twilight to be marked with sunlight. On day 4, in comes the light of the sun. It marks the midst of the week. And what happened in the midst of the week at the crucifixion? The light of the sun of Yahuwah, went out. So Yahuwah, from creation, Yahuwah marked the midst of the week so that we have no excuse. We know exactly when the crucifixion was. It was in the middle of the week. It was on the 4th cycle, or a Wednesday. Yahuwah has several special covenants in the creation week. Day 1, the covenant of the day and of the night. You can read about that in Jeremiah. The Rev was marked by the sun through the Or light. And on day 6, there was the covenant of marriage. And on day 7, the covenant of the Sabbath. But on day 4 was the covenant of our salvation. Why? Because the Erev was marked, the Erev twilight was marked by the sun through the Boker light. That marks the midst of the week for us. And we know beyond any shadow of a doubt that Yahusha was crucified on a 4th cycle or a Wednesday, the midst of the week. That is marked right from creation. The day 4 evening twilight is the first twilight marked by the sun in the creation week. So day 4 was a very, very, very special day.
Absolutely. So you have to know which sun, if it's the S-O-N or the S-U-N, right? And we're going to have a slide of that midst of the week. I'm going to have Tim teach it. It's coming up in about 2 slides. Yahuwah's creation covenants linked to calendar studies in a huge way. Day 4 also has a very special midst of the week covenant, making it a very unique day, and it links to prophetic calendar studies. I just thought this was so interesting because I've heard the question asked, why didn't Yahuwah put the lights in the sky on day 3? And then he could have just nicely put those plants, all those trees and grass and flowers and everything on day 4, because they would have had a sun, from day 3, but he didn't. There's a reason for it. Day 4 had to have the lights there for a special reason, and we believe it's to mark this midst of the week. The marker for this covenant can only be found, everybody, when the day begins with light. You cannot find this midst of the week if you start your week with sunset or evening or midnight or anything else. It has to start with the light in the morning. Just what happened on the midst of the creation week that is so notable and also includes another covenant. Well, Tim already told you what it was. Yes, it was Yahuwah's covenant. On day 4, Yahuwah's covenant of salvation is given to his people. He already wrote it into the creation week. Will this day 4 covenant have a solid application to the timing of Yahushua's crucifixion from the prophecy of Daniel 9:27? So do you see what's happening here? From day 4 in the creation week, connecting to Daniel 9:27 around 600 BC, and then connecting to Yahushua's Passover around 31 AD. Can you see how this covenant in the midst of week is basically pulling together the whole gospel of salvation? It's so interesting. And if it does, is that a special message from our Creator right in the midst of the first week of creation? That he's giving us a special message about the covenant of salvation? On day 4, does the SON along with the SUN have a midst of the week marker for our salvation? And next we're going to look at this creation week chart that complements Daniel 9:27's messianic prophecy, and we're going to show you how the actual midst of the week is in a very special position. Tim, do you think you can go ahead and teach this slide, and maybe I'll help you too?
Okay.
Counting out this midst of the week.
Counting out the midst of the week, Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. The midst of the week is not Friday. This is a prophecy that was marked from creation, and it gives a whole new depth to the meaning when it says that Yahushua was slain from the foundation of the earth, because it was marked right at the very base foundation of this earth when it was made. So on your left, you see the first cycle, the second cycle, and the third cycle. And these are according to the day start at dawn. You cannot find this when you go with the day starting at sunset, because confusion reigns. So there, on the 4th light season, Abib 14, we see the 11th hour, and there's the 6th hour. These sacrifices were completed by the 11th hour, and that is what Josephus has recorded. There comes the Erev. This is the midst of the week. That is when the sacrifices and the oblations were terminated. They had fulfilled their purpose, and there was no need for them ever again. The 12th hour also fulfills the Daniel 9:27 prophecy. The 4th cycle is the exact midst of the week, and the Erev, the evening twilight, is the very exact midst of the week. That is what was marked at creation by the commissioning of the light, and then the sun gave the twilight its action. That's how the twilight happened on day 4. Salvation marker with this evening to twilight. That's what our salvation is all about. And we are taught, and I believe this for many years, that Yahusha was crucified on a Friday. But that is not what's written in the scripture. It's just simply not there. Not in the Gospels, and not in the Torah. It just didn't happen. Not that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in the very first week of creation, of course, we know there was no sun there to bring in the light on days 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there was no sun to give a sunset on days 1, 2, and 3. So it's pretty hard to start, I don't know how you do it. You could start with the evening. But if you start your week with an evening, and I didn't make a chart for it, but if you start your week with an evening, I will just show you what happens. The midst of your week will come right here at the beginning of the light season of the 4th cycle. It will be here in the morning. Okay, let's say 6 o'clock in the morning. That does not mark the salvation covenant, because salvation covenant was marked in the midst of the week when all the sacrifices were to cease. That's why we say that Josephus makes it very clear that all the sacrifices were completed by the 11th hour. But when you use an evening day start, the midst of the week marker is at 6 o'clock in the morning on the Wednesday or the 4th light season. So it makes a big difference. You cannot find the plan of salvation with the evening day start. So since day 5 of creation, the SUN's light has been commissioned to usher in and out every single twilight, every single day. It's a very important job description. And it also provides, this twilight also provides for us not to be looking to the sun. It's a buffer zone where we just watch for the light, because Moses said you are not to look to the sun, the moon, the stars, or any of the heavenly lights that are up there, any of the heavenly bodies. So this twilight time is a time where we can watch for the light in the morning without watching for a sun. That we know, of course, the pagans were watching for the sun coming up and sun going down, the same with the moon. So now it's time for us to put everything together, put all these pieces together and see what we can come up with. We've done a pretty good review, and I bet you could do this all on your own. We're starting to wrap up. Every day start of Yahuwah's calendar is always about light. There was one type of light that is very unique and it's very special. It was on day 1 when the day began with Yahuwah's light, and that was defined as or. But we should look up this word or because it has a very special definition for 216. It is first defined, everybody, as illumination. The second definition is a luminary in the sky. Illumination is a verb. A luminary is a noun, like the sun. But the very first definition is illumination. There was no sun that was commissioned to be the light giver on days 1, 2, and 3. This light was given by Yahuwah. It refers specifically to Yahuwah, and he's the one that supplied the light before there was any light givers commissioned for light in the sky. Those are definitions that you need to know. Let's look for these literal events and these definitions. In the creation week, there are 3 different types of day starts, and all 3 types begin with light. Remember, day 1 begins with Yahuwah's light, and although we didn't go into the details, there was darkness that appeared with all that came to be there between verses 1 and 2, and then Yahuwah had to restore the light. We did that in part 1. Day 1 light, which is or, was never ever mixed with darkness for day start in Genesis 1. In fact, the or light is never mixed with darkness ever unless it's of a divine origin, like the darkness at the cross. Or is always the light during the day when the mixture is done. It is never ever a mixture like Boker, not or. But on days 2, 3, and 4 of creation, those days began with another form of light that was not supplied by the sun. So let's look for these literal events and these definitions. The day start of light for days 2, 3, and 4 is a mixture of light and darkness, and that's called boker, or morning. On these 3 days, the boker light mixture was also provided by Yahuwah, because there is no sun in the sky at this point in time. We'll come to a great big review of putting everything together in just a little bit. Since day 5 of creation, the mixture of boker morning light is now commissioned by the sun, both in the morning and in the evening. Boker can also be known as dawn, morning twilight, or the breaking of the day. And this boker is always a mixture of light and darkness. When? Before the sunrise. It is always before the sunrise. Once the sun has come up, you no longer have boker. So the creation week summary for the day start, we're going to put it all together now. Every 24-hour cycle always begins with light, and it always ends when night is over. So on day 1, we're going to see this the same. I'll have 3 ovals here. Day 1, it's light through night, but it's or light through Leal night. Okay, that's on day 1. On days 2, 3, and 4, we have the same pattern. We have light through night, just like we had here on day 1, light through night. But this time, it's boker. It's a mixture that starts out the day and it goes through to Leal. So this is a boker light. We still have light through night, but now it's a boker through Leal. And guess what? This boker is without the sun. And then we come to day 5. And ever since day 5, this is the way it's been. We still have the same pattern, light through night. And it's also a boker. It's a mixture. It's a mixture through to Leal night. So we still have the same patterns, but this time it's a boker that's commissioned by the sun. Can you see how that's different? Day 1, we have pure light from illumination from Yahuwah. He is the one, and then your 24 hours goes through to the end of Leal. On days 2, 3, and 4, you have light through night, but it's boker. It's a mixture, and that's a boker without the sun. And on day 5 and ever since, our day starts with a boker that is commissioned by the sun. It's kind of interesting. So let's just start to summarize everything here between these 2 concepts, these definitions and these orders of events. In concept A, the definitions of every calendar term will assist us in understanding the literal events in creation week and the 2 very important covenants from Yahusha. These covenants are closely tied to markers of our salvation, bringing forth from that light, springing forth right from light. It's always from light. And you know what? The order of the literal events of the creation week cannot be understood as well if you do not know these proper definitions. You have to know that. And why is that? Because evening always follows light. Just because it says and the evening and the morning doesn't mean the day starts in the morning. It just means the evening twilight came first after the light. It wasn't the morning. It couldn't be. You can't have a morning twilight after light. It doesn't work that way. In concept B, we're going to just do a little review of this order of literal events. The literal events of days 1 to 5 follow a perfect order for every day start, and it always starts with light. Those literal events also point out that special evening marker on the day number 4 of creation, and that's about our salvation. So maybe you'll remember this little chart here. Day 1, the day always began with Yahuwah's or light. That was the only day that began with just pure light, his light. Days 2, 3, and 4, we have the days beginning with a boker light, a mixture that Yahuwah provided. He doesn't tell us how he did it, but that's what it says. It's a mixture. And on day 5 and ever since, now our days are starting with a sun's boker light. These are all the literal events over here. And you can only know and understand them from the definitions of the terms. But you know what? Confusion reigns when claiming Yahuwah's day begins at midnight. That's what Rome does. That's confusion. But confusion also remains when people say the day starts with sunset or evening. Some are saying noon. And you know what? Sunrise doesn't work either, because sunrise does not begin the day. Light does. And there's light long before sunrise. And when you start claiming the day starts at any of these, midnight, sunset, evening, noon, or sunrise, or anywhere in between except for Boker light, you are joining together what Yahweh has separated. He said, don't do it. Just look to the light. And the good news is that we can all step free of all of these errors and traditions. We don't have to be held down or burdened by them anymore. We can know that when you see that first light in the sky, that's the new day beginning, just like tomorrow morning will be Sabbath with the first light in the sky. So now that the dawn day start is completely understood from the days of creation and why it's light and not evening that starts the day, all of these events around the Yom Kippur and the crucifixion absolutely can have full clarity. And we did those details in part 1 of the study. So now that you understand this part 2, now you can go back and look at Yom Kippur and Passover, 2 really big events, okay? And understand why those mornings have to be the start of the day. Boker begins the day. Tim, would you like to finish with this slide? Because I know it's one of your favorite texts in Psalms 19:1, and it's one of my favorites too, if he's there.
God, this mic will, I'll get it. Psalms 19:1. Isn't this a beautiful picture? Charlene says this is an actual picture taken from Norway. Just absolutely phenomenal. Psalms 19:1. The heavens are proclaiming the esteem of El, and the expanse is declaring the work of his hand. From Yahuwah to his bride, from dawn to dawn. Could there be a better picture when it says the heavens are proclaiming the esteem of El? Look what he did in the sky. No, what just an absolutely incredible, beautiful ribbon all through the sky. Just, I'm in awe. It's even better than a rainbow as far as I'm thinking.
Those are beautiful Norway lights, northern lights. Yes, it did say that they were real and not photoshopped. They are gorgeous. It just really does get your attention. But anyway, we've come to understand that Yahuwah's yoke is so easy and his burden is light, just like it was in those 7 days of creation. Every day begins with light back then, and it still does today. And Matthew 11:30 is a wonderful verse because Yahuwah's yoke is easy. You know, when you're observing a day that starts at sunset, it just kind of gets to be a burden and you don't really realize it until you get rid of it. But that's the end of our presentation for this particular part 2. We hope that you really, really enjoyed it. And if there's any questions on the day start, according to Genesis 1, verses 1 to 5, and all the way up to day 5, you can just send them to questions at Study the Calendar, and do look around at studythecalendar.com for any of the other studies as well. Thank you for joining us, and we had fun with you, and I hope that you can understand this and share it with your friends. Thank you.